I'd like to have these handed out.
Sure.
Should be enough, or more.
Yeah, I can. I'll take some.
Okay, is the microphone working okay? You understand?
Okay.
Yes.
You can pass the rest.
Yeah.
I'll take one.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. If you don't hear well, raise your hand and or stand up and scream or something. I'm going to begin with a prayer. So let us pray. Dear Lord, we're grateful. Thanks for the day, for all its opportunities and challenges, for the sun and for the leaves that are still so green. For all that is precious in this day, we thank you. May our teaching and learning in this hour be acceptable in your sight. Amen. Okay, I want to direct your attention to the handout, which is going to explain a lot, I hope. I hope everyone has one.
Do you have any extras?
That's a whole lot of them are there.
Okay. Any more?
As you see, it says paranormal orientation. And again, it's an orientation not only to the subject, but also to me as to why I'm doing this. So let's read it together. Traditional Christianity, Catholic and Protestant, has generally opposed dealing with things paranormal or psychic because of biblical warnings about evil influences. For example, and then we have these texts in the Bible, in the New Testament, and Jesus told his disciples to be wise as serpents and gentle. That's not a good translation. It should be as innocent as doves, wise as serpents, innocent as doves. That's in Matthew. And then you will know them by their fruit, again, Matthew. We too are to be wise judges in all claims we encounter. And when we have to do with the paranormal, certainly we're going to have to do with claims. Next paragraph. Over the centuries, science has progressed far beyond what was known in biblical times. And with it has come interest and research in the claims of paranormal reports. We know there are notable instances of the paranormal in the course of Christian history. For example, in the Hermetic science of the Italian Renaissance, intellectuals experimented with mental manipulation of aspects of nature. And the prophecies of Nostradamus claimed precognition of future events. And in the 18th century, the scientist and seer Emanuel Swedenborg claimed not only to visit heaven and hell, but to have received knowledge from Jesus for a book he was to write. And he did write it. And John Wesley, founder of Methodism, wrote in his journals about poltergeist phenomena in his paternal home. Wesley's report has a typically modern feature. It is entirely objective, as in science. In the late 19th century, first in England, and soon after in the United States and Europe, the first societies for paranormal research were founded by persons of scientific mind and pursuit. In the early 20th century, William James, Harvard professor of philosophy, wrote about the paranormal in his well-known book, Varieties of Religious Experience. And since then, an impressive list of eminent scientists and other prominent people, among them Albert Einstein, have taken interest in the paranormal. And there I refer you online to the PSI Encyclopedia. Now, if you look that up, you may have to search a bit to find the eminent people, but if you get the right target, you will see them, a whole list of them. Next paragraph, paranormal or psychical events are characterized as extraordinary events beyond the range of normal experience. Some kinds of events are related, but some are entirely different from others. As for what accounts for them, there are theories, but no proofs, or not the kind that satisfy examination by the scientific method of testing. Skeptical science regards paranormal evidence as either fraud, illusion, or badly understood natural occurrence. The evidence for the paranormal is almost entirely anecdotal, consisting of individual reports of personal experiences. In most cases, repeating events for testing has not been possible, but many professional scientists are interested in these happenings and are investigating them as paranormal events. I would say more and more scientists are involved. Next paragraph. Such happenings are reported worldwide, and investigators tell us they occur more frequently than we usually think. Some reports are matters of curiosity, oddities that move us to think or wonder about the natural world, which, as quantum physics has shown, is more complex than previously known. And some people are apparently more often involved in certain kinds of paranormal events. For example, clairvoyance. What I mean, again, is that some people are more attuned to having these kinds of events than other people. Some of them. Then the next sentence, reports that seem to be indications of life after death naturally receive more serious attention. And now the personal. What I know about the paranormal comes from a few books and online resources, first-person stories, and some very limited experience. Some of you may know as much or more about the subject, and some may have experienced one or more extraordinary events, which you're invited to share with the class. I will try to describe and give examples of the phenomena and share what I've learned. Beyond that, class interest and discussion should help give direction for each session. I'd like to pause here and comment before we read further. I do know relatively little. I really mean it when I say that maybe some people in the class know more than I. It was something like 4 years ago that I read a book by a friend of mine. It's this little book, it's still available, called Encountering Mystery, Religious Experience in a Secular Age by Dale Allison. And it got me to reading other things. Dale is an academic. He is a very well-trained, very intelligent professor of New Testament at Princeton Theological Seminary. So he's somebody who's working in theology. And he has had personal experiences, remarkable personal experiences. I think he's one of those people who attracts these things or is tuned to them so that they happen. And that's what got him started, his own experience. And then he got involved in the literature, and he wrote this book, Encountering Mystery. And since then, he has written 2 books on Jesus. One is on the resurrection, and another one is called Encountering Jesus, in which he talks about Jesus' miracles. And what he does that's so interesting in those books, besides applying his enormous scholarship, he is one of the best scholars recognized today in the world in New Testament research. He looks sideways at analogies out of the world of the paranormal to things that happened in the New Testament. Now, miracles. Now, miracles we generally limit to things that God does. Paranormal events, we will say, perhaps we want to talk about miraculous, maybe we don't, but that's kind of our decision. We're not using New Testament language, but that's kind of beside the point right now. What I want to come back to is my limited knowledge. So with such limitation, and I openly confess it, I absolutely do not know everything. I'm not a researcher. I have not read dozens of books. I have maybe read 8, 10, something like that. Some that have been recommended. So why am I up here? Because my very good friend and dear neighbor, Loda Mitchell. So there, Loda. And other than that, my dear friend and neighbor, Walt Heinzelman. We did some reading together at one time, and then, as you may know, at Providence Point, a little group was formed. But it was Loda that kind of moved things to get me to do this here at Southminster. So, whether you praise or blame, all right, let's go further. Online professional resources, which I really encourage you to use. They're very helpful. And all the things, they don't cost anything if you have a computer, right? You can get in online. Okay, reading. Many articles of the professional societies are accessible and informative. Others written by professionals for professionals can be difficult to understand. By searching specific topics, one can find other resources such as the International Association for Near-Death Studies and the Near-Death Research Foundation, which features personal stories. And I must say, the last time I looked at it, looked like hundreds of them. That seems to be what that online source does. It collects personal stories. Wikipedia articles are informative, but typically skeptical. Now, skepticism is still a very, very important point of view in dealing with anything paranormal. Skepticism. Let me finish this and finish the sources and come back and comment. Society for Psychical Research. That is the British, it's the very first one, founded 1882. It's the first of the societies, and it's still prominent. It has the PSI Encyclopedia. Then the American Society for Psychical Research, that's the first American. Then Parapsychological Association. This is a very important source, it seems to me, mainly for professionals. But it has this very good glossary of terms. You want to see what the words are. Then Division of Perceptual Studies, University of Virginia School of Medicine. Now that's interesting because this is in a university and a school of medicine. And Grayson, who wrote After, all of you know the book After. Who does not know After? A lot of you do not. It is a standard work on near-death experiences. Bruce Grayson. He's a medical doctor, psychiatrist, who got involved in research in these. He is a member of that group at the University of Virginia Medical School, Bruce Grayson. I think that's important to mention. It's also important, this is clearly where a university is not hiding a paranormal research group. That's, I think, important. Then we have these two centers of scientific investigation, the Institute of Noetic Sciences and the Rhine Research Center, and both of them are fairly famous for their research, and you can get into those sites and see what they're doing, see their reports. Now, I want to come back to the problem of skepticism. Now, this is a favorite book I had recommended along the way, been very impressed by it. It's Mary Rose Barrington. Mary Rose Barrington, who's now deceased. She was head of the Oxford University Society for the Paranormal before she died. She was a prominent member also of the British Society of Psychic Research. She wrote several things that I'm going to be mentioning, but this one summarizes what she has done. It's called Talking About Psychical Research, Thoughts on Life, Death, and the Nature of Reality. And I'd just like to read a little bit here about scientific methods. Just have to find exactly where I got it. Give me just a second, because it's important to get it. Well, I'm not finding it right away. Doesn't matter, I can tell you what she says. What she says is admittedly anecdotal evidence for the paranormal, which is what science objects to because you can't test it. And very, very frequently, because you can't test, we find in scientific reports, just recently I read in Wikipedia, that people are lying, they're cheating. So they tell you the things that are happening and they're cheating. It's an ancient objection to mediums that many of them cheat, and we know they did. So, on the other hand, there's interesting evidence for genuine mediums, which I mean to talk about. But what Barrington says about anecdotal evidence, she says darn right, anecdotal, personal stories, personal experiences. That's what it's about. That's what the whole thing is about. It doesn't mean it can't be scientifically investigated. It can be, because there are all kinds of scientists involved applying scientific methodology, but that does not mean getting the kinds of proof that skeptical scientists want. That is proof by testing. Although there's some tests that seem to work. For example, telepathy tests. Now that puts some pretty good evidence there that they can repeat telepathy tests. Another one is clairvoyance. Those have been repeated with some real accuracy. So it's, what do we say about the skepticism of the science? I have a colleague just this past week, retired Presbyterian minister, a good friend, always for years, good friend. And we were talking about this. And we got to near-death experiences. And he said, you know, that's just brain. He said they are working now, he thinks it's already proven, it's not, that there is something in the brain that after the body dies stays functioning long enough and feeds the brain with pleasant images, and that explains near-death experiences. And I said, well, I didn't think so, and he said, well, I do. So he represents a skeptic. And skepticism certainly must be taken seriously because it is very, very prevalent. On the other hand, being able to talk about the paranormal is also something we should not be actually ashamed of. Kind of reminds me of the scientist who disapproves, like the overbearing father who tells his daughter, who's talking about this, he says, Emily, don't be foolish, go to your room. Go ahead, shut up, I don't want to hear this. Or the indulgent mother who tells her son, who's involved in this, he says, "I know it, dear, but do you really want the neighbors to think you're loony?" Being able to talk about it certainly with people who are open to the talk helps, but certainly if you're yourself open to talking about it, you may well run into people who are not. Kinds of paranormal experiences, kinds of events. Now I'm going to, maybe you know what these mean, but I'm going to give them, at least from my point of view, clarification. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, that's very popularly called NDEs in the literature. And threshold wake-up. I'll be bringing in a book next time for threshold wake-up. Near-death experience, again, Grayson's After, I think, is a superb book, but there are lots of them out there. As a matter of fact, there's so many paperback books in areas of the paranormal that it looks like a big business. It really does. Huge numbers of paperbacks being sold. Communication of the deceased. What has been reported? Visual, audible, touch, sense of presence. Telepathy, extrasensory perception. Telepathic communication between people. Dreams, where dreams are influenced by telepathic experiments. Clairvoyance. Remote viewing. Remote viewing has been demonstrated. Have you heard about the Stargate experiment? Any of you ever heard of that? This was an experiment of the government. It started private. Government picked it up. The CIA picked it up. This ran for about 20 years. Discontinued in the 90s. Apparently for the reason that it was not accurate enough to keep up, but there are different reasons apparently also in there. But remote viewing, the famous story is Joe McGonigal. You could look him up on Wikipedia, the web. Also, he has a book about his experiences. He was in the Army, and it was discovered that he had this sensitivity or ability for remote viewing, and they put him to work, and he could describe things remotely, things that were real. For example, in Russia, that was the interesting part, to get him to describe whatever things, targets that they proposed in Russia. And if you go online and you look up Stargate experiment, you can see the government reports because they've been declassified. And one of the things in there, a whole series of drawings that remote viewers made of distant targets. Now, what you can see is the lack of detail, but you definitely can get a sense of the target. For example, if we have a bridge with supports, you might well get a remote viewer showing something like that with the supports. That kind of tracing, general tracing of what a scene looked like, without having it so exact that, for example, the military could use it. But showing that there is something to remote viewing. The government did not deny it. They just said it wasn't worthwhile. And it got shut down in the 90s. Stargate experiment was a CIA experiment. CIA took it over. In my personal experience, I was a professor for a while in the 90s in Prague at Charles University, guest professor. There's a prelude to that. There was a professor who came in the 80s to late 80s, came to Pittsburgh, so we kind of swapped. I went there, he came here. But he told the story when he was in Pittsburgh, that his wife was working for a Russian institute in Prague. And what she was working on, and this is literally what he said, what she was working on was mental control of electrical devices. For example, a very sensitive receiver that would turn on a light mentally. And this was a Russian experiment in Prague. Well, the very interesting thing is, I go back in the 90s, and I just bring this up. I said, interesting story you told me. He said, no, I never said that. All of a sudden, it's a no-no. All of a sudden, don't say that, don't talk about it. Well, it's very interesting. These kinds of experiments do go on. And like I say, some people seem more talented in doing it. Again, that Joe McGonigal, he wrote the book about his experiences. It's in one of those paperbacks. It's available through Amazon. My personal experience, and I think this is common, telepathy is supposed to be quite common. So common that we aren't really aware of it. For example, husbands and wives who know what the partner is thinking. Just seems to happen. Or could be good friends. Know what the other one's thinking. Another one, my experience, I think I've experienced that with my wife. Maybe sometime I wish I hadn't. No, that's just a joke. I remember once we were in different places and had two different cars, and I remember thinking she's coming over this hill, and I'm in my car and I'm going up the hill, and she's coming, and I sensed that, I would say good 10, 15 seconds before it happened, and there she was. My only other experience, personal, is in the 1990s. It must have been about 9:30 at night. I was working in the study. I was sitting in my big easy chair with a book. My mind was totally on the book, absolutely on the book. I'm an academic, right? So I get lost in books. All of a sudden, I had a very, very strong sense of my father's presence. And that lasted at least a minute. I put the book down. I was astounded. It was like he was there. And in some sense he was. So that was sense of presence. And that's what other people have reported, having that sense of presence. Now there's no way of predicting who's going to have these experiences or why. That's just not in the book. It just happens. Now that was one for me. And I remember once we had a little dinner party. We're sitting around the table after dinner with some people. I think in this case, my wife and I knew the wife of this couple, but we didn't know the husband. And he was an airline pilot. And he told a story. We got to talking about this. And he said, when I was a co-pilot, in a fairly large, one of these big airplanes, there's a lot of people. Suddenly I had the sense that we were on a collision course with another airplane. And I grabbed the controls, I was up. And sure enough, when they went up, another airplane went underneath. Now That's remarkable. That story from a pilot. Now, it probably should happen far more often because these planes do collide. Why it happens once, there, not always. It's one of the strange things about the paranormal. You just don't know. Okay, those are my little stories. I'm going to move now to kinds of paranormal events. If any time you have a question, you please raise your hand. Because we want these discussions. Yes?
Can I raise just one quick point? Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code, has a new book out, and one of the main characters is a noetic scientist.
All right.
And it's set in Prague, oddly enough. So I haven't read it yet, but it's
Yeah, okay.
a lot of coincidences.
It comes into popular literature, so very interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah,
What is meant by threshold wake up?
like what?
Threshold wake up under the near-death
Yeah.
experience?
Threshold wake up, people who are dying may not have been conscious for some time, suddenly wake up, lucid. Now this is not all that uncommon. What is uncommon, and the reason why it's actually included, is that there are people who have severe brain damage. For example, from Alzheimer's, years of Alzheimer's, and wake up in complete lucidity, and there is no explanation, because they should not be able to do that. Wake up and talk. Maybe days, maybe a short time, maybe a week or two before they die, it happens. Now, there's a book called Threshold, which I intend to bring in to show you, but that's a title, Threshold. It's originally European, it's been translated into English, and it has these stories, right? Threshold wake up. What explains it? Well, the best explanation out of the paranormal is that mind is greater than brain. Theory. Mind and brain are like radio sender and radio receiver. The receiver is the brain, and the sender could be coming from different people, or from the cosmic consciousness, as it's often called. But this is theory, that mind is greater than brain. Mind is brain is, so to speak, the filter of everything that comes through, except in exceptional cases where mind seems to be functioning above and beyond brain. As, for example, in near-death experiences, or at least certainly in some of them. I want to look at the rest of these. Oh, we did telepathy, clairvoyance, remote viewing, postcognition, precognition. Precognition is of future events. Now this has been experimented with, and there is a book, a paperback I read. One of the things is I get to talking with people and I give them my books because, read this, read that. A book called Mind Reach, about experiments in precognition and in remote viewing. All right, the next one, poltergeist, that's knocking, right? Mysterious knocking. Jot, now that's Mary Rose Barrington. The book I held up a while ago, she coined the word jot. And what jot stands for is just one of those things. Just one of those things. Now, she wrote a book. It's on Amazon called Jot, J-O-T-T. And there's another book by a scientist in Australia who wrote his experiences with it and people he knows. And some quite remarkable stories of things that disappear suddenly. and then may or may not reappear. And when they reappear, they may be in a completely different place. Now, this is something that everybody should experience, but apparently some people experience it more than others. And you think about it. Have you had that experience? Things mysteriously disappear. They may come back. They may not come back. There's a story, a guy in Australia tells a story of a woman whose keys, car keys, with house keys, everything on the bundle, disappeared. So bad she had to go replace all of them. They had been, apparently, she had left them in the front door, sticking in the front door, lock. And 2 months later, they suddenly appeared on the pillow of her bed, in her bedroom, the keys. Now, you say, that's, can't be. But that's what she reported. It happened. So, dots. Now, Mary Rose Barrington wrote a book on it, and she includes it in this book that I have. And as we have opportunity, I'm going to be telling some stories about dots, and also about poltergeist. Psychokinesis, moving things with your mind, with your will. Again, there are experiments in psychokinesis, but it also has to do with tables moving. We're going to be talking about very interesting explanations for what happens in the Travel Channel stories. I think you'll be surprised to hear explanations for that. It's not the channel travels explanations. Very different. They never talk about this. Explaining them out of the paranormal. Mediums and ghosts, visions. There's a study in Psychology Today by a man named Stephen Taylor, where he talks about who sees ghosts. And he says there's a personality type that sees ghosts and there's others that don't. Who sees ghosts? People who are primed for it, who are kind of scared, who are anxious about the whole subject. Whereas people who are not completely objective, they're not going to see them. So some subjectivity has a lot to do with things paranormal. Mediums, some fascinating material there, which we'll perhaps get into next week. Reincarnation. This is one I've had extremely hard time believing, but there are books, a couple of books, at the University of Virginia site that are about reincarnation, especially cases in India, where it seems to recur in such a way that it's remembered by children. It's worth reading, worth pursuing. And then the third man phenomenon. There's a book called Third Man, and it has to do with explorers, athletes, and so forth who've been in extreme situations, physically, to the point of not surviving. And someone appears, something that helps them through. And when the crisis is over, they're gone. And this is repeatedly asserted by especially men who have been in these kinds of situations. Extreme, death-threatening, for example, caught in a snowstorm high up on a mountain and being helped through it by someone who's later not there. Third man. All right, I think I'm coming to the end of today. Any questions? I invite you to help me with direction. If you just leave it up to me, I'll find something to talk about, even if You know, we have to go to church history to go. That's my area, church history, not paranormal. But do you have questions or points you'd like to make or requests? John?
I just wanted to share this. I come at this from a very different perspective because when I was young, I had dreams that came true. So I don't need evidence. I know this stuff is real. So when I would read the Bible, I just want to put, we're clearly warned to be careful about practicing, seeking these things. But at the same side, we are given gifts from God, sign gifts, blessings. Half the Old Testament is prophetic, you know. So I just sort of put out there, because I read it, that these can be gifts and blessings, but I also think messing around with them can be, you know, detrimental.
Yes,
to our
I agree
spiritual
with you.
well-being.
That's why I started out with
I agree.
the biblical piece. And we don't want paranormal things rivaling our Christian faith. So you come believing something else, and you're kind of developing a new paganism. So we'd like to see it in service that God is finally, certainly also supreme in these areas, so that we don't have to fear that. But we also don't have to fear the paranormal if we look at it the right way. So thank you for your comment. Yeah? Yeah?
Do you have any update of scientific research on Evan Alexander's near-death experience and what happened with his brain? He tried to explain it and...
No, I don't.
Okay.
But I think the book is there. If you look him up.
Well, that was
And
years
Amazon,
years
I
ago.
don't have it. My one source there, the one I've concentrated on is the After by Grayson. There are lots of books. If you look up those sites, the websites, the ones having to do with near-death experiences, there you see a good deal of discussion, also of those books. I do not know those sites well. I just happen to notice they're there. I have more depended on looking at the traditional sites, which are very good. Notice one of them on the American Psychic Society, an article on prayer, the effectiveness of prayer. And this is a medical doctor researching effectiveness of prayer, and he's coming out with positive results. It doesn't mean it works all the time, certainly not. I mean, as a pastor, I certainly prayed enough for people who didn't get well, some who did, but it can be, expectations can be very great, and they're not met. And then on the other hand, some very remarkable recoveries when you didn't expect, didn't anticipate recovery. Well, thank you. I'm done. So pick it up again next week.